All right, at this time, we call to order the Wednesday, January 20, 2021 meeting of the Urbana Zoning Board of Appeals. May we have a roll call, please?
Yes, Ms. Chester. Mr. Cho is excused. Ms. McLaughlin.
Here.
Mr. Roosh.
Here.
Ms. Uchtman.
She's muted.
Yeah, Nancy, I think you're muted.
I'm trying to bring my, can you hear me now?
We can, yeah.
I'm trying to bring my photo up, but I don't know. Oh, start my video. Okay. There you go.
Okay. And I see you are present, so I will mark you as such. Mr. Warmbrun.
Here.
And Mr. Welch.
Here, we have a quorum. Are there any changes to the agenda?
There are, I guess, a slight change. We noticed, well, actually, Ms. McLaughlin pointed out to us that the case for the garage variance, we had incorrectly noticed that in the legal ad. So we are not going to consider that case tonight. We will re-advertise and then consider that at the next ZBA meeting. So I suppose that would come off of this agenda.
All right. At this time, then we'll be considering the minutes from the previous board meeting. Has everyone had a chance to review those? Do we have a motion?
I move the minutes be adopted as written.
I second.
It's been moved and seconded. We have a roll call for that as well.
Okay. I see Ms. Chester has joined us, so I guess I can start with her. Ms. Chester?
Yes.
Miss McLaughlin?
Yes.
Mr. Roosh?
Yes.
Ms. Uchtman?
Yes.
Mr. Warmbrun?
Yes.
And Mr. Welch?
Yes. The minutes are approved. Are there any communications?
Kat, have you received any communications?
There was just one letter of public input that was received, and it was included in the packet.
Thank you.
All right. Do we have any continued public hearings?
We do not.
All right. At this time, then we will take up the issue of new public hearings. And at this time, I will call for hearing ZBA 2020-C-05, a request by Gary Apfelstadt for a conditional use permit to allow a duplex at 213 West Illinois Street in the R2 Single Family Residential Zoning District. Do we have a staff report?
Yes. This is a request by Gary Apfelstadt for a conditional use permit and two related variances to allow a duplex at 213 West Illinois Street on a lot smaller than what is required by the zoning ordinance and with 2 parking spaces where 4 are required. As Kevin addressed, a third variance is requested on the same property, and we will bring that case to the February 17th meeting. And one letter of public input was received prior to the meeting, and that was included in your packet. Here's a location map of the property. The property is in in the northeastern portion of the West Urbana neighborhood. The applicant purchased the home as a duplex in 2014, unaware of the non-conforming status of the property. Records show that the home has been a duplex since at least 2007, and probably much longer. And the lot is 50 feet wide and 5,775 square feet which is 3.75% smaller and 16.67% more narrow than the minimum lot size requirements for the R2 district. Here's a zoning map. The property is zoned R2, single-family residential, and is surrounded by R2 zoning. Duplexes are allowed in R2 with a conditional use permit. Nearby are single-family residences, duplexes, small apartment buildings. There are other non-conforming duplex and apartment uses adjacent to the property and throughout the surrounding neighborhood. This is the comprehensive designation for the area. The comprehensive plan identifies this area as appropriate for urban pattern of residential uses. Residential urban pattern is defined as areas containing primarily single-family residential housing, but may also include a variety of compatible land uses such as duplexes, townhomes, civic uses, industrial uses, and parks where zoning is appropriate. Residential areas can have different physical patterns of development. The continued use of the property as a duplex is appropriate for the area as defined by the comprehensive plan. This is a site photo of the property from the corner of Illinois and Cedar. The request for a conditional use permit is an attempt to remedy a situation that was unknowingly created by the petitioner, and the requested major variances would allow the existing duplex to remain as it is on a substandard lot with 2 fewer parking spaces than required by the zoning ordinance. Neither the home nor the lot itself will be altered. This is just another photo from Cedar, and that one includes the garage a little bit better. To summarize, staff found that the application meets the requirements for a conditional use permit. The duplex has existed on the property for at least 13 years, likely much longer. It is a registered rental property and provides rental housing to the neighborhood. The proposed use is the same as the current use, which has not been injurious or detrimental to the neighborhood or the public welfare, and allowing the duplex use to continue would preserve the essential character of the district where other duplexes and apartment buildings are common. Staff also found that the application meets the requirements for the requested variances. The lot was platted to be smaller and more narrow than what is now required by the zoning ordinance. The lot size and configuration create a practical difficulty in providing the required number of off-street parking spaces. The continued use as a duplex is consistent with the surrounding neighborhood and will not cause a nuisance at this time or in the future. The requested variances will not alter the size of the structure or the property in any way, and the request was made to allow the existing duplex to continue and bring the property into conformity with the zoning ordinance. The requested conditional use permit and 2 major variances would allow its continued use as a duplex. And the zoning board has 2 separate recommendations with this case. The first of the following options of the requested conditional use permit are to approve the conditional use permit, approve the conditional use permit with any conditions or requirements, or deny the conditional use permit. And then for the requested variances, the zoning board can either forward the cases to city council with a recommendation for approval, forward the cases to city council with a recommendation for approval with certain terms and conditions, or deny the variance request. Staff recommends approval of the requested conditional use permit and the major variances as detailed in the staff report. And I believe Gary is also on the call to answer any questions for the applicant.
Thank you, Kat. Are there any questions for staff? Go on, Joanne. Go ahead.
We're not going to take up the garage tonight?
No.
I think you missed, Kevin, this announcement on that. So there was an error in the advertisement, in the legal ad, and in the neighbor notice that said that the encroachment would be 4 feet, where it's actually 11 feet. So we're planning to take that case to the February 17th ZBA meeting.
My issue is with parking requirement, and I think that the issue of the garage is tied to the parking. Well, maybe not. Okay.
I actually do have a question about that.
Go ahead, Adam.
So in that previous picture, you could see my former residence because it's right next door across Cedar Alley from that property, so I know it well. So the garage is the only two off-street parking that you're speaking of, correct? And so this wouldn't change anything in terms of, like, if we're not taking up the garage, why do we need to take up the rest of the property? Is, I guess, my question.
So like, how did the duplex use come into question, I guess?
Right, basically, yeah.
I can speak a little bit to that, and Kevin may be able to step in with additional details. The first case that was brought to planning's attention was the garage and a variance for the garage to be built in the required front yard. However, Gary also applied for a building permit to do internal renovation, which is when we discovered that this was a duplex use that was never legalized by the city, even though it's been a duplex use for 13 years to the best of our knowledge, and likely much longer than that. So we're going back now with a conditional use permit to make this a legal use with documentation through the city.
Okay, and I know that when the zoning was changed, there were properties that were grandfathered into duplex use. Do we not assume that this was one of those, or do we have a list of those, or what?
So there was a memo written on this property from 1991 that documented it as a single family home. And it's very likely that the property owner at the time did not correct that use when the city assumed that it was a single family home. So while it may have been a duplex at the time, our records show it as a single family home. And this is an attempt to correct that.
Got it. Thank you for the explanation.
Yes, Joanne?
I looked at the property record cards at the Cunningham Township Assessor's Office. I looked at it online, and it's listed as a single family home in at least in 1975. And I know that those records were taken from the old supervisor of assessment records, which were when they were first put on property record cards in the 50s, and it was listed as a single family home. So it was converted at some time. Certainly wasn't built as a single family home. But I don't see how we can do the duplex without taking into consideration granting without considering the parking at the same time.
I think I can speak a little bit to that. Regardless of whether or not the garage is rebuilt or that a variance is granted for the garage to be rebuilt in the front yard, there are 2 parking spaces on the property now, and one of the variances that was presented tonight would address the fact that there are 2 less parking spaces than required by the zoning ordinance. So regardless of whether or not that garage variance is granted, there will be 2 parking spaces on the property.
Another question, can you park on Illinois Street in front of that house?
Yes.
No, not on Illinois Street.
Right. No, parking ends on the block just before that on Illinois Street. It's once you get to that block, it starts narrowing down for the median.
Okay.
But you can park on Cedar right next to that house. There's room for about 3 cars right next to the house on Cedar. And then another 2 or 3 cars just across Cedar Alley.
And how wide of a street is Cedar?
As wide as any street in West Urbana.
Oh,
It is.
Cedar is narrow.
I think
Well,
Cedar's a narrow street.
It's relatively narrow, but it's not frequently traveled because the most traffic it ever gets is when parents park along it to go pick up their kids from Leal.
Further down.
Yeah. Well, Leal is a kitty corner to Cedar and California.
Right. Right. Okay.
Are there additional questions for staff? Yes, ma'am.
Right now, are the 2 parking spaces in the garage?
Yes.
And when was the garage built? I'm just curious.
There's a really, That is a really
May
old
I,
garage.
may I answer?
Yes,
Well, yeah, you know what, Mr. Absfeld? How do you pronounce your last name, sir?
With a name like that, any way you can pronounce it.
I'm gonna swear you in because
Okay.
you're supposed to be sworn in, so that way you can participate right now.
Okay.
Do you swear that any testimony you give will be true and accurate to the best of your belief?
Yes, I do.
Thank you. Go ahead. Do you remember the question you were going to answer?
Yes. My name's Gary Apfelstadt, the current owner of the Residence 213 West Illinois. The the house structure shows up on the Urbana Sanborn plat of 1897, and the garage shows up on a Sanborn plat of Urbana from 1902. So the house was built before 1897, and the garage was built between 1897 and 1902.
Yes, Nancy.
that's fine. Thank you.
I have a question.
Yes, Ashley, go ahead.
This is for staff. I wondered if there had been any complaints about parking in or around the property. I don't know if parking complaints in that area would be tied to a property, but I guess just to inform the decision of whether 2 is enough.
As far as the property goes, there were no related parking complaints about 213 West Illinois. The public letter of public input, I believe, also mentioned that he was not worried about parking in the area. But other than that, we have not received any significant input on that.
Thank you.
Yes, Nancy.
And how many bedrooms are we talking about in these 2 units?
You want me to answer?
Yes, please.
Go ahead.
There's 2 apartments. First floor is a 2-bedroom apartment. The second floor is a 2-bedroom apartment.
Thank you.
Are there any further questions for staff? Does the petitioner desire to speak any further?
I think all of the information you have is adequate to cover the request.
All right. Are there any additional questions for the petitioner? Yes, Ashley.
I would just ask if you have any concerns about the parking or if you think 2 spaces has been adequate and that's why you're requesting it.
2 has been adequate. We have encouraged residents with more than one. Basically, there's 1 space for each apartment. When we had 2 people with vehicles in the apartment, we encouraged them to get a parking license separately with the city of Urbana so that they could have on-street parking, and then the tenants split the cost for one person who's going to be parking on the street. So that's how we've managed the fact that there are only 2 parking places for the apartment building.
Thank you. It does seem like, and maybe this is more for staff, if we were to put more parking on this property, A, there's not that much space for it. And B, I guess I want to clarify if, in terms of like the amount of paved space on a single lot, if that is like doable on that size of property, is that something we have to consider? I mean, I'm personally not necessarily in favor of adding parking, but it also just doesn't seem like maybe feasible or desirable.
I'll admit I did not calculate the OSR, the open space ratio for this particular property. Although a couple factors in the variance request were the narrow lot size, with it only being 50 feet wide. It does create a practical difficulty in providing more than the necessary amount of parking. In this case, with 2 spaces already being provided, it would be fairly difficult to add a 3rd space, which also factors into the garage discussion, which is something we'll talk about next month. But moving the garage further west in this case creates, or there's rationale for moving the garage further west in this case, but
West
keeping it, sorry?
West or east?
East, I'm sorry. I'm turned around. Yeah, that's practical for the variance request for the garage as well.
From my recollection of seeing that backyard every day, if we were to grant a waiver for whatever paving would be necessary, there is space to put two more parking spaces back there. However, there's a large garden on that property with a variety of plants, and it would take away all their green space. That whole alleyway is just house upon house. They all have their parking in the back, and some of the properties have just pavement or gravel from property line to property line. And that's the way it is back there. But it's nice when you don't have to do that, and the garage is a feature of that property that makes it so they don't have to.
It's kind of hard. Oh,
Go ahead, Joanne.
it's kind of hard to talk about granting a variance for parking spaces when we're not talking about the garage at the same time. And since I'm in favor of having more parking places,
May I speak?
yes.
Yes, go ahead.
This is petitioner Gary Apfelstadt. The variances for parking are to change from 4 required to 2 existing. The work on the garage will not be changing the number of parking places. The garage will be the same basic size as the current garage. So at no point will we be changing from 2 spaces to 4 spaces because of the small size of the lot and the current green space that's at the residence. So the variance for the 2 spaces needs to be cast just as the variance for the duplex needs to be cast, as the variance for the lot size needs to be cast because of the existing structure as it existed for many years. And that's the end of my comment.
Yes, Joanne, go ahead.
Well, I'm just going to say this because the garage is so close to the sidewalk that I guess I can wait to say that till the garage. It just seems to me that it's all tied together.
And so, Joan,
Okay.
are you saying that if the garage were not there, you could really have 3 or 4 parking spaces along the alley?
Well, I'm just saying that by code, I don't think you could build a garage new 4 feet from the property line or from the sidewalk. And I think that coming out of that garage, there's no way you have visibility. You can't look either way before you get over the sidewalk. And so I think that the garage can't be built in the same spot for safety reasons. And maybe that changes the number of parking requirements, maybe it would have an influence on that, but I just find it hard to talk about them it all not together. Because I think that you should have, I don't think you should, I think you should have, if you have two duplexes, you should have 4 parking places, if you can do it. That's all.
Are there any?
I have
Yes,
a comment.
Ashley, go ahead.
Regardless of the garage, just speaking to parking, in my opinion, and I don't live in this neighborhood, it seems like with the street parking available, and given that this neighborhood is known for being walkable and accessible to many destinations by foot or bike or transit, 2 parking spaces does not concern me, on top of the fact that there haven't been, you know, any noteworthy complaints that have accumulated over the years, and that it's functioned as a duplex for quite some time. 2 parking spaces, I think, make sense. I don't think we necessarily want to increase paved surface in the area. And it just doesn't seem necessary given the location and lack of complaints. But that is outside of the garage conversation, just in terms of number of spaces.
And I would just say for that block, I agree that it would be beneficial to not have more paved area on that block. There's already so much paved area on that block because of the way the property lines are drawn and the parking requirements they try to fit in. All but 1 residence along that block on Illinois Street are either duplexes or cooperative housing. So they all have, it's a very densely populated block, and that's just a feature of that particular part of the neighborhood. So I think preserving what green space can be preserved is a very good thing.
Are there any additional questions, comments for either the staff or the petitioner? Hearing none. Are we ready to call the questions? Well, we're gonna have to do these, at least one of them separately, because you've got conditional use permit and major variances, and they require different standards for passage. So are we ready to call the question regarding the conditional use permit ZBA 2020-C-05?
Which is that one?
That is a request for a conditional use permit to allow a duplex at 213 West Illinois Street in the R2 Single Family Residential Zoning District.
Yeah. Could I make a motion?
Yes, if
Yeah, I move that we approve the request for a conditional use permit to allow a duplex at 213 West Illinois Street in the R2 Single Family Residential Zoning District. That's CBA case 2020-C-05.
it's been moved. Is there a second to that motion?
Second.
I'll second it.
Okay. Need a roll call for that?
Okay. Okay, so moved by Ms. Uchtman, and I heard 2 seconds in there. I think Ashley was, did I hear Ashley first? or
That's fine.
Joanne, you want to take the second? I heard you speak too. I'll give you the second.
Second.
Joanne. Okay. All right, Mr. Roosh,
Yes.
Ms. Uchtman,
Yes.
Mr. Warmbrun,
Yes. Yes.
Mr. Welch,
Yes.
and Ms. Chester.
Yes.
And wait, Ms. McLaughlin.
Yes.
I can count.
Okay,
Okay, thanks.
that motion carries, and that is approved. Next, we call for the question of ZBA-2020-Major-07, a request to allow a duplex on a lot 50 feet wide and 5,775 square feet in area at 213 West Illinois in the R2 Single Family Residential Zoning District. And you did complete your report, Kat, for that as well? Yes.
07 and 08 are both for this evening. Yeah.
Oh, and you've completed your staff report?
Yes.
Okay.
So moved. I move that we approve.
Do we need to do these separately? 07 and then 08, or all at once, Kevin?
I think the choice is up to you.
It's up to me.
They're tied together, so together is, I guess, I don't think any of you are going to vote differently on the
All
two.
right, then, at this same time, then, we're calling for a motion, a request to reduce the number of parking spaces required for a duplex from 4 to 2 at 213 West Illinois Street in the R2 Single Family Residential Zoning District, that being ZBA-2020-Major-08.
I move to approve ZBA-2020-Major-07 and ZBA-2020-Major-08.
It's been so moved. Is there a second? A question, Charles?
Yes. That needs to be sent to the city council, correct?
Correct. It will be sent to the city council if it receives the necessary vote here.
That's right, but doesn't that need to be in the motion?
All right.
I-
Did you
And-
amend that, Adam?
I move to accept, I move to approve ZBA-2020-Major-07 and ZBA-2020-Major-08 and forward to the city council with our recommendation.
I'll second that.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion? Can we have those motions called for a vote, Kevin?
Oh, we can. Ms. McLaughlin,
Yes.
Ms. Chester,
Yes.
Ms. Euchman,
Yes.
Mr. Warmbrun,
Yes.
Mr. Welch,
Yes.
and Mr. Roosh.
Yes.
Those two motions have also been approved by the required, unanimously actually, and will be forwarded on to the city council for their consideration at their meeting of
February 8th.
February 8th. Thank you. Sir, we are done with your part of the meeting. You're welcome to stay on if you want to hear what else we have to do. Is there any old
Thank you.
business?
I'll be leaving, and thank you for your action.
All right. Thank you, sir.
Okay.
Is there any old business, Kevin?
There is none.
Is there any new business?
There is none.
We have no one present in the audience, do we?
There is one audience member. They don't have their hand raised right now. Mick Wolf. I don't know if you had any comments or not, but if you do, I'll unmute you here. If you did want to address the zoning board. And I'm not hearing anything, so I assume that's a no.
We will take it that way.
Mick Wolf.
Oh, are you on, Mr. Wolf?
Yeah, we're at 308 West Illinois, but no comments. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. We have a staff report.
No staff report tonight.
Is there a study session?
Not one of those either.
All right, that concluding all of the business before the board tonight, I move that we adjourn.